Hey everyone! Today we're going to slowly explore a world rarely spoken about openly. How prostitutes lived in the Middle Ages and much more beyond the usual stories. This topic may surprise you with its complexity, the human stories behind the shadows of medieval society. But before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it where you are? It's always fascinating to imagine how this tale travels across time and space to reach you. Now, imagine yourself walking the cobblestone streets of a medieval town just as dusk begins to settle. The air smells of wood smoke and freshly baked bread, mingling with the less savory scents that always linger in crowded places. Life in these towns was a mix of hardship and moments of simple joy, even for those living on the fringes, like the women who worked as prostitutes. Far from the lurid fantasies of modern imagination, their lives were complicated, shaped by the harshness of poverty, the rules of the local authorities, and the delicate balancing act of survival. Most medieval prostitutes did not choose this life lightly. Economic desperation often led women here, particularly those from poor rural villages where opportunities were few. When harvests failed or families faced illness, women might travel to towns seeking work and food, only to find the options narrow and the streets unwelcoming. Many took shelter in inns or small houses near the town center, where the bustle of merchants, craftsmen, and travelers brought both customers and danger. Their days began like anyone else's, gathering what food they could afford or barter for. Bread was a staple, often coarse, made from rye or barley rather than the prized wheat reserved for the wealthy. Porridge made from oats or peas was common for breakfast, sometimes sweetened with a bit of honey or dried fruits if they were lucky. Soup, a thick stew made with root vegetables like turnips and carrots, and occasionally scraps of meat or fish, formed the main meal. Meat itself was a rarity, something saved for feast days or special occasions, and even then, the cuts were usually the less desirable parts. Despite their difficult circumstances, these women found moments of entertainment and camaraderie. In the evenings, the inns where many worked often doubled as gathering spots for locals and travelers alike. Music filled the air, with simple instruments like fiddles or lutes accompanying songs about love, loss, or heroic deeds. Dancing was common, a way to forget the day's worries for a short while. For the prostitutes, such gatherings could be a chance to exchange news, share advice, or simply feel a sense of belonging amid a society that often viewed them with suspicion or disdain. Religious life also played a paradoxical role in their world. The church condemned prostitution, labeling it sinful, yet some orders and convents offered refuge or care for these women, especially if they sought to leave their trade. Pilgrimages and church festivals could provide temporary respite and social interaction beyond the confines of their usual lives. But often, the pressure to conform, to be saved, was accompanied by harsh judgment or even punishment. Curiously, medieval laws about prostitution varied widely depending on the region and time. Some cities regulated the trade, assigning specific districts or tolerating brothels under strict oversight. Others outlawed it outright, leading to secretive encounters and the constant threat of fines, imprisonment, or public humiliation. These rules shaped not only how prostitutes worked but also their relationships with the community, the town guards, and local authorities. As night fell, the streets took on a different character. Lanterns flickered, casting long shadows as customers appeared from taverns or marketplaces. The women's work was dangerous, not only because of disease or violence, but also because of social stigma that could isolate them from families or potential allies. Still, many exhibited remarkable resilience and resourcefulness, weaving their way through the challenges with grit and determination. But what about their personal lives? Did they have families, friends, dreams? Some certainly did. While many were isolated, others formed close bonds with fellow women, creating informal support networks. These relationships could be vital for protection, sharing scarce resources, or simply offering comfort amid a harsh reality. In the background of all this, broader medieval society continued its slow, grinding rhythm. Markets bustled during the day, fairs brought excitement and commerce, and rulers issued edicts that could affect everyone's lives. The women's stories intertwined with these larger forces, reflecting not only individual struggle but also the social fabric of the time. So much more awaits as we delve deeper into their world. How they dressed, how their trade operated, and the surprising ways some managed to rise above their circumstances. The journey through this hidden side of history offers a quiet glimpse into humanity's complexity and endurance. As the morning sun crept over the thatched roofs, casting a gentle light upon the narrow streets, the daily rhythm of the medieval town began anew. For many women involved in prostitution, the dawn marked not only a time to rest, but also the beginning of a demanding cycle of survival, carefully woven into the fabric of the town's life. Unlike the romanticized images often portrayed, their existence was shaped by pragmatism and resilience rather than glamour. Clothing was one of the most immediate markers of status and occupation. Medieval sumptuary laws often dictated what people could wear according to their social rank, but prostitutes occupied an ambiguous space. Many wore simple, practical garments made of coarse wool or linen, dyed in muted colors like brown, gray, or faded green. However, in some cases, they adopted brighter fabrics or accessories, scarves, ribbons, or embroidered cuffs, to attract attention or signal availability, though this often invited judgment and hostility from the townsfolk. The houses or rooms where these women worked varied significantly. In larger cities, certain districts, sometimes called red light districts today, became hubs for brothels and taverns. Here, the buildings were cramped but lively, with low ceilings and small windows. Rooms might be shared among several women, creating a communal atmosphere, or rented individually by those who could afford a bit more privacy. In smaller towns, prostitution was more discreet, with women often working alone or in inns where travelers lodged. Food remained a daily concern. Many prostitutes had limited means to buy fresh ingredients, relying on what the markets offered at the end of the day: leftover vegetables, stale bread, or salted fish. Stews were common, simmered slowly to stretch whatever scraps were available. When times were better, women might enjoy seasonal fruits like apples or berries picked from nearby fields or gardens. Ale and cider were staples, not only for customers but also for the women themselves, serving as a brief escape from the cold and fatigue of their work. Entertainment and socializing played a subtle yet vital role. In the evenings, after the day's business slowed, women might gather in common rooms to share stories or sing quietly. These moments of fellowship helped ease the isolation that often came with their profession. Storytelling was especially cherished, passing down legends of saints, heroic battles, or moral tales meant to inspire or warn. The songs ranged from melancholic ballads to bawdy tavern tunes, reflecting the dual nature of their lives, caught between sorrow and defiant joy. Religion remained a complicated presence. While the church officially condemned prostitution as sinful, many clergy recognized the harsh realities these women faced. Some friars and nuns administered charity, providing food or medical care, especially for those suffering from illnesses like syphilis, which was rampant and incurable at the time. Confession and penitence were avenues for spiritual solace, yet public penance could also mean humiliation, as seen in town rituals where fallen women were paraded or branded. Laws surrounding prostitution fluctuated not only by region but by the attitudes of local rulers and the economic needs of the town. In some places, authorities tolerated or even regulated brothels, seeing them as a necessary evil that kept other social problems at bay. For example, in cities like Paris or London, licensed brothels operated under official oversight, with taxes collected and certain rules enforced to control behavior and public health. Conversely, other towns imposed harsh penalties, including whipping, imprisonment, or exile, especially during periods of moral or religious reform. Despite the risks, many prostitutes developed survival strategies that went beyond mere endurance. Some formed alliances with local guilds, tavern keepers, or influential men who could offer protection or information. Others cultivated charm and wit to navigate the complex social webs, learning to read clients' moods or negotiate prices carefully. There are stories of women who saved enough money to open their own small establishments, gaining a modicum of independence rare for medieval women. Health was a constant concern. Without modern medicine, diseases spread quickly, and treatment was rudimentary at best. Herbal remedies, poultices, and superstition mingled in an attempt to ward off ailments. Women often relied on midwives or wise women in the community who had knowledge of herbs and healing practices, though outcomes were unpredictable. Childbirth was especially perilous, with high mortality rates for both mother and child. Some prostitutes bore children who were raised within their small communities or sent to relatives, while others faced the heartache of abandonment or loss. Daily life also included moments of small pleasure. Simple games like dice or card-like tiles provided distraction during quiet evenings. Festivals and fairs offered rare chances to dress up, dance, and momentarily step outside harsh realities. Seasonal changes affected routines. Harsh winters meant fewer customers and greater hardship, while spring and summer brought more movement, travelers, and opportunities. The relationship between prostitutes and their customers was multifaceted. While financial transaction was central, some women cultivated regular patrons, blending business with companionship. Stories survive of bonds formed across class lines, some fleeting, others lasting longer, with all the complexities of trust, betrayal, affection, and exploitation. The women had to constantly assess whom to trust, balancing vulnerability with the need to protect themselves. In the broader context, the existence of prostitution revealed much about medieval society itself. It exposed the rigid social hierarchies, the interplay between necessity and morality, and the limited options available to women in a world dominated by men and strict social codes. Yet, within this difficult framework, women carved out spaces of agency, community, and survival. As the sun set once again over the medieval town, the lives of these women continued in quiet perseverance. Their stories, often overlooked or forgotten, invite us to reflect on human resilience amid hardship and the layered textures of history waiting to be uncovered as twilight deepened, casting long shadows over the narrow lanes and timbered houses. The life of medieval prostitutes unfolded with quiet complexity beyond what many imagined. Their world was not just defined by the act of their trade, but also by the social, economic, and cultural forces shaping every aspect of their existence. To understand their daily reality, it's essential to consider how their roles intertwined with the community, the economy, and even the shifting tides of medieval law. For many women, entering prostitution was a reluctant choice born out of necessity rather than desire. Rural villages offered limited opportunities for women who were poor or orphaned. Domestic service, farm labor, or marriage were not always available or sufficient for survival. When these avenues closed, towns and cities, growing hubs of commerce and trade, beckoned as places of hope, albeit filled with risks and uncertainties. Upon arrival, women found themselves navigating unfamiliar social landscapes, often without family support or safety nets. Within the brothels or inns where they lived and worked, daily routines were regimented by both economic demands and social rules. Morning chores involved cleaning rooms, laundering garments, and preparing the small spaces they called home. Women often shared responsibilities, creating informal households where cooperation was essential for survival. In the limited daylight hours, some might seek small side jobs, washing clothes, mending garments, or selling trinkets in markets, to supplement their incomes. The physical toll of their work was immense. Long hours, exposure to harsh weather, and the constant threat of violence created an environment where health problems quickly mounted. Without access to professional medical care, women relied heavily on herbal remedies and advice from elder women or midwives. Plants like yarrow, sage, and willow were commonly used for pain relief and wound treatment. Despite these efforts, many suffered chronic conditions, infections, or debilitating fatigue. Food, though scarce and simple, was a source of comfort and sustenance. Broth made from boiled bones, stale bread soaked in vinegar, and wild greens foraged from nearby fields or ditches were staples. Occasionally, charity from sympathetic townsfolk or church institutions supplemented their diets. Festivals, market days, or fairs brought chances to acquire delicacies, cheese, salted meats, or fresh fruit that were otherwise out of reach. Sharing meals became an act of community building, providing emotional support amid the hardships. Entertainment and distraction took many forms. Storytelling was a cherished tradition, especially in the evenings when the bustle quieted and the women gathered around hearths or in taverns. Tales of faraway lands, legendary knights, saints' miracles, or cautionary moral stories helped create a shared cultural space. Singing was common, ranging from plaintive ballads to ribald tavern songs, reflecting the full spectrum of human experience: love, loss, hope, and defiance. Religious beliefs and practices offered both solace and tension. The church's stance on prostitution was officially condemnatory, yet many clergy and religious women offered care, counseling, or refuge. Confession was a complex ritual. It allowed for spiritual cleansing but also could expose women to judgment or punishment. Public acts of penance, such as walking barefoot through town or wearing distinctive clothing, served as reminders of social boundaries and morality. Some prostitutes sought redemption through joining religious communities or supporting themselves by working in charitable institutions. Medieval laws on prostitution were inconsistent and often contradictory. In some regions, local authorities recognized the inevitability of prostitution and sought to regulate it through licensing, taxation, and zoning. These measures aimed to contain what was viewed as a social necessity, keeping it away from respectable neighborhoods while maintaining public order. Licensed brothels were sometimes subject to inspections, rules about cleanliness, and limits on the number of women who could work. Conversely, during times of religious revival or political change, crackdowns occurred, with increased penalties including fines, imprisonment, or corporal punishment. Interactions between prostitutes and the wider community were layered with suspicion, dependence, and occasional solidarity. Townspeople might avoid these women, yet also rely on them for entertainment or companionship. Local officials balanced enforcement with pragmatism, understanding that outright prohibition often drove prostitution underground, increasing risks and disorder. Some women cultivated relationships with influential men or guild members, gaining protection or patronage that afforded greater security. Sexually transmitted diseases were a serious and poorly understood threat. Conditions like syphilis, which emerged in Europe during the late medieval period, spread rapidly and were untreatable. The physical suffering and social stigma associated with illness added another layer of hardship. Some women turned to spiritual healing or folk remedies, while others found themselves isolated or abandoned. Despite the dangers and difficulties, many prostitutes demonstrated remarkable resilience and agency. Through alliances, savvy negotiation, and sometimes entrepreneurial spirit, a number achieved relative stability. Stories survive of women who became madams, managing houses and employing others. These figures wielded a degree of power and influence uncommon for women at the time, navigating the complexities of law, economy, and social relations. Personal relationships were often complicated. Some women maintained connections with families or children, though these ties were strained by stigma and economic realities. Friendships among women in the trade created networks of mutual support, essential for protection and emotional survival. At times, affection or love emerged between women and their clients, blurring the lines between business and intimacy. The surrounding medieval world shaped and was shaped by these hidden lives. Political upheavals, plagues, and economic shifts affected demand and conditions. For example, the Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, dramatically altered population dynamics, labor markets, and social attitudes, impacting prostitutes as well. Urban growth brought new challenges and opportunities, as cities became melting pots of cultures, ideas, and conflicts. As you imagine this complex world, picture the muted colors of worn fabrics, the flickering light of candles and lanterns, the distant sound of church bells mingling with laughter and song from taverns. Feel the chill of stone walls, the warmth of shared meals, and the weight of unseen struggles carried silently by these women. Their stories, woven into the fabric of medieval life, remind us of the human capacity to endure and adapt, even in the shadows. As dawn slowly brightened the horizon, the medieval town stirred once more, its streets beginning to hum with the sounds of daily life. The creak of wooden carts, the chatter of market vendors, and the footsteps of townsfolk heading to work or prayer. For the women working as prostitutes, The day was a mixture of routine tasks, careful negotiations, and moments of precarious rest, all shaped by the complex social fabric that defined their existence. One essential aspect of their lives was the way they navigated the harsh realities of public perception. Despite the necessity of their work, prostitutes were often marginalized, facing scorn, suspicion, and sometimes outright hostility from neighbors and authorities. Many towns imposed visible markers, such as distinctive clothing or badges, to identify them in public. This practice was intended both as a deterrent and a way to control their movements. For example, some cities required them to wear bright-colored scarves or special caps. While this could isolate them, it also created a sense of shared identity among the women themselves. The environment where they worked was often cramped and lacking in privacy. Brothels and inns were modest establishments, with low ceilings, narrow staircases, and rooms barely larger than a bed. Furnishings were sparse. Rough wooden chairs, simple tables, and beds made of straw or coarse mattresses. Curtains or tapestries offered minimal separation between spaces, and the thin walls meant sounds traveled easily. In these close quarters, the women lived, worked, and rested side by side, forming a unique community bound by shared experiences. Food and nutrition remained a daily concern. The diet was repetitive but filling. Root vegetables like onions, leeks, and turnips featured prominently, as did pulses such as lentils and peas. Meat was scarce and usually reserved for special occasions or wealthier clients. Occasionally, women might catch small game, such as rabbits or birds, supplementing their meals with whatever the nearby countryside or rivers provided. Markets offered herbs and spices, though these were luxuries, and cooking was often done over open hearths or communal fires, with the smell of smoke permeating their living spaces. The rhythms of work were punctuated by moments of respite. In quieter hours, women would repair clothing, mend linens, or embroider small pieces, skills that not only served practical needs but sometimes provided an additional source of income when selling handiwork. Storytelling and gossip were central to passing time and building camaraderie. Tales of distant lands, heroic knights, or local legends sparked imaginations and momentarily lifted spirits from the weight of daily struggles. Religious life continued to influence their world in subtle and overt ways. Many women attended Mass when possible, seeking comfort in ritual despite the Church's harsh stance on their profession. Some found solace in private prayers or in the company of charitable religious orders, which sometimes offered education or shelter. Yet, this relationship was fraught, as public acts of penance could bring shame and further marginalization. The tension between faith and social reality created complex personal conflicts for many. Laws and regulations surrounding prostitution were in constant flux, reflecting shifting political, moral, and economic climates. Authorities aimed to maintain public order, often oscillating between tolerance and repression. Brothels might be taxed and inspected in some cities, while others enforced curfews or closed houses during religious festivals. Enforcement was uneven, with bribes or favoritism playing a role in who escaped punishment. The precarious legal standing left many women vulnerable to exploitation by officials or criminals. In addition to physical dangers, prostitutes faced the psychological burden of their position. The stigma attached to their work affected personal relationships and self-perception. Some women wrote or spoke of feelings of loneliness, shame, or longing for a different life. Yet, others embraced their roles with pragmatic acceptance or even defiance, finding strength in independence and the bonds they formed. The relationships with clients were varied and complex. While some encounters were transactional and brief, others developed into more regular or emotionally charged connections. Women learned to read and respond to their customers' needs, balancing warmth and caution. In some cases, patrons provided protection, gifts, or assistance beyond payment, blurring lines between business and personal ties. Health and hygiene were ongoing challenges. Bathing was infrequent due to limited facilities and prevailing beliefs about water's effects on health. Clothing was washed as often as possible, but fleas and lice were common nuisances. Medical knowledge was limited, with herbal remedies and folk cures the primary options. Midwives and healers were invaluable resources, offering care for both illnesses and childbirth, which was especially perilous. Despite these hardships, moments of joy and celebration punctuated their lives. Town festivals, religious holidays, and market fairs brought color, music, and dancing to otherwise monotonous routines. Women took part in these events when able, sometimes performing dances or songs themselves, contributing to the vibrant cultural tapestry of medieval life. Economically, prostitution was both a source of income and a means of navigating limited opportunities for women. Some managed to save money, investing in small possessions or better lodgings. Others aspired to leave the trade altogether, seeking marriage, religious refuge, or alternative work. These ambitions were often complicated by social barriers and personal circumstances. As political events swept across medieval Europe, wars, plagues, and social upheavals, the impact on prostitutes was significant. For instance, during the Black Death, many towns saw a temporary collapse in social structures, altering demand and survival strategies. Economic downturns increased competition and vulnerability, while times of prosperity allowed for better conditions and opportunities. The layered existence of these women was an integral yet often hidden part of medieval society. Their lives reflected the tensions between morality and necessity, oppression and agency, isolation and community. Through resilience, adaptation, and sometimes sheer will, they navigated a world that was both unforgiving and surprisingly interconnected. As night returns to the medieval town, the flickering glow of lanterns reveals faces marked by endurance and complexity, women whose stories remain vital threads in the rich tapestry of history. The night in a medieval town had its own distinct atmosphere, a mix of danger, opportunity, and unpredictability. As the last of the market stalls closed and merchants carried their unsold goods home, the streets became quieter, though never truly silent. Somewhere, a drunken song drifted from a tavern. Elsewhere, the sound of a cartwheel on uneven stones echoed in the darkness. For the prostitutes who worked these hours, this was often the most profitable and most hazardous time of day. By law or custom, many were restricted to specific areas after sunset, sometimes near the town gates, the docks, or along certain alleys known for their trade. These districts could be lively, filled with the smell of roasting meat from street vendors and the sharp tang of cheap wine, but they also attracted thieves, aggressive clients, and troublemakers. It was not uncommon for women to walk together for safety, or for brothel owners to employ men who acted as guards, watching for signs of trouble. Inside the brothels themselves, the atmosphere varied depending on the wealth and management of the establishment. In the more organized houses, there might be a common room with benches and low tables, candles burning in iron holders, and a small hearth for warmth. Music could be played on a lute or a pipe, setting a mood to entice patrons. Women sat together, talking quietly, sipping watered ale, and waiting to be approached. In poorer places, there was little more than a single dimly lit room, with a few stools, straw scattered on the floor, and barely enough space for privacy. Negotiating with clients was a skill in itself. Prices were not fixed and could change depending on the time of night, the woman's appearance, or the wealth of the customer. Experienced prostitutes learned how to read a man's clothing and demeanor, guessing his ability to pay and adjusting their approach accordingly. Some preferred to work only with regulars, valuing the predictability and reduced risk of violence. Others had no choice but to take whoever came, hoping for the best. The hazards of the night went beyond physical violence. Drunkenness was a constant problem, often leading to disputes, broken agreements, or outright assaults. In some towns, the local watch or night guards patrolled these areas, but their presence was inconsistent. At times they offered genuine protection, while in other cases they abused their power, extorting money or demanding free services under threat of arrest. Disease was an ever-present shadow. Without understanding the nature of infection, prevention methods were based on superstition or rudimentary observation. Women sometimes washed with vinegar or herbal infusions, believing these to ward off illness. Midwives and older prostitutes passed down knowledge of plants like garlic, mugwort, and rue, which were thought to have protective properties. While these practices occasionally offered some benefit, they were far from foolproof, and outbreaks could devastate entire communities of women. In between clients, there were small moments of humanity. Women mended their clothing by candlelight, shared bites of food, or whispered news and rumors from the streets. There was a subtle sisterhood, born from shared dangers and mutual reliance. Arguments did happen, competition for customers, personal jealousies, but in times of crisis, many stood together. The survival of one could depend on the quick action of another. Festivities in town changed the rhythm of work. During religious feast days or major fairs, there was often a surge in customers, as travelers and merchants filled the inns and taverns. On such nights, the streets were bright with lanterns, and music spilled out from every corner. These periods could bring much-needed earnings, but also drew the attention of moral reformers, who sometimes staged raids to cleanse the streets. Women had to be quick to disappear into side alleys or sympathetic businesses when such crackdowns occurred. Despite the dangers, there were women who managed to find a certain degree of independence. Those who saved enough might rent their own small rooms, working without a brothel keeper and keeping all their earnings. Others invested in better clothing or personal adornments to attract wealthier clients, creating an image that allowed them to charge higher prices. A few even transitioned into roles as madams, running houses of their own, setting rules, and choosing the women who worked there. This was a rare form of authority for a medieval woman, giving them influence over both their business and their safety. The emotional toll of the work was harder to measure. Many women kept their private feelings guarded, hiding sadness or fatigue behind practiced smiles. The constant need to perform, to be charming, compliant, or alluring left little space for their own desires. Yet, within this profession, some women found moments of genuine connection. A client might become a confidant, a protector, or even, in rare cases, a partner in life beyond the trade. These relationships were complicated, sometimes fraught with imbalance, but they provided glimpses of something more than mere survival. As the hours moved past midnight, the streets began to thin again. Fewer customers wandered the lanes, and the danger from thieves increased. Women who had earned enough for the night often withdrew early, securing their doors and settling into whatever warmth their small quarters could provide. For others, the night stretched on, each knock on the door a mix of hope and apprehension. And as the final candles guttered in the drafty rooms of the brothels, there was always the knowledge that the cycle would begin again at dawn. The same negotiations, the same dangers, the same struggle for survival. Yet within this repetitive rhythm lay a quiet strength, a testament to the adaptability and endurance of those who lived in the margins of medieval society, that as the first light of dawn began to seep through the narrow gaps between timber-framed houses, the women of the night carefully prepared to meet another day, one filled with both familiar routines and unpredictable challenges. Their appearance, clothing, and personal care were not merely about vanity but essential tools in navigating the precarious world they inhabited. Clothing in the Middle Ages was a language of its own, communicating social status, occupation, and sometimes even a person's reputation. For prostitutes, dressing was a careful balancing act. They needed to appear attractive enough to draw clients but not so conspicuous as to attract unwanted legal attention or social condemnation. Fabrics were often coarse, made from wool or linen, but brighter colors like red, green, or blue were prized when affordable, as they caught the eye in dimly lit taverns or street corners. Accessories such as scarves, ribbons, or simple jewelry, usually inexpensive and easily replaceable, added touches of individuality. Dresses were usually simple, often consisting of a fitted bodice and a full skirt that allowed freedom of movement. Sleeves might be detachable or loose, enabling women to adjust their clothing according to weather or personal preference. Some wore aprons or shawls to cover themselves during the day, which could be removed at night to reveal more alluring attire. Shoes were sturdy but plain, designed for walking long distances over uneven roads and cobblestones. Beauty practices were both practical and symbolic. Despite limited resources, women paid attention to their skin and hair, knowing that cleanliness and appearance could influence their earnings. Bathing was infrequent, but, when possible, was done using water heated over a fire and scented with herbs like rosemary or lavender. These fragrant plants were believed to have cleansing and protective properties, as well as to mask less pleasant odors. Hair was often braided or tied back simply, though some women might adorn it with ribbons or combs. Makeup, as understood today, was rare and sometimes dangerous, given the toxic nature of many substances. However, some used natural dyes or crushed berries to add color to their lips or cheeks. Whitening the face with powders made from lead was a risky practice but occasionally employed by those seeking to imitate the pale complexion favored by the nobility. These efforts were often limited by cost and availability, but the desire to present a pleasing appearance remained strong. Personal grooming extended to nails and teeth, though regular care was difficult. Dental health was poor across all social classes, but women sometimes used chewing sticks from aromatic trees to freshen breath or clean teeth. Fingernails were kept trimmed and clean when possible, as long nails could be seen as impractical or unclean in their line of work. Preparation for meeting clients was a ritual blending practicality and performance. Women chose their clothing and accessories with care, often consulting each other about what would be most effective in attracting customers. They practiced smiles, conversation, and gestures, honing the art of charm that was crucial for success. Some memorized popular songs or stories to entertain patrons, while others developed skills in reading people's moods and desires. The environment in which they worked was equally important. Rooms were tidied and warmed by small fires or candles, though resources for comfort were minimal. Scented herbs or flowers might be scattered to improve the atmosphere. Women often kept personal items, small mirrors, combs, or keepsakes, that offered reminders of identity beyond their occupation. Despite the hardships, moments of pride and self-expression were not uncommon. Clothing and beauty allowed women to assert some control over their lives, crafting identities that went beyond the stigmatized roles imposed by society. For some, these small acts of preparation and adornment were sources of dignity and strength. At the same time, the risks associated with their work cast a constant shadow. Wearing too much finery could attract the wrong kind of attention, from jealous neighbors, harsh magistrates, or violent clients. Conversely, appearing too plain could reduce their chances of earning enough to survive. This delicate balance required skill, experience, and often a keen understanding of local customs and expectations. In addition to outward appearance, mental preparation was vital. Women steeled themselves for the long hours ahead, managing fear, fatigue, and emotional strain. Some recited prayers or mantras, seeking protection or courage. Others relied on the support of companions, sharing advice and encouragement in hushed tones before stepping out into the streets or welcoming guests. Throughout the day, the cycle of work and rest, negotiation and caution, connection and isolation continued. Each woman's story was unique, shaped by personal history, relationships, and the ever-changing social landscape. Their appearance and self-care practices offer a window into this complex existence, revealing the interplay of survival, identity, and humanity in a world often defined by hardship. The small, cramped quarters where many medieval prostitutes lived were a world unto themselves, spaces that combined shelter, work, and fragile privacy within the bustling, often unforgiving town environment. These rooms, sometimes little more than a single chamber within a crowded inn or brothel, shaped daily routines and social interactions in profound ways. Most of these dwellings were built from timber and wattle, with thatched roofs that leaked during rainy seasons. Floors were typically made of packed earth or roughly hewn planks, often cold and damp. The scant furnishings reflected modest means: a bed of straw or coarse mattress, a wooden chest or box for belongings, a simple table and stool, and perhaps a small shelf for personal items. Curtains or tapestries, if present, provided limited insulation or separation. The air inside was heavy with the mingling sense of smoke, herbs, and human presence, a blend sometimes comforting, sometimes oppressive. Ventilation was poor, and the flickering light of tallow candles or rushlights cast dancing shadows on the walls. Privacy was scarce, and sounds from neighbors or the street echoed through thin walls and open doorways. Despite these challenges, women worked to make their spaces as livable as possible. They hung fabrics to block drafts, sprinkled herbs to mask odors, and arranged personal belongings to create small corners of familiarity and control. These efforts fostered a sense of home, however fragile, amid constant uncertainty. Within this environment, social bonds played a crucial role. Women living and working together formed informal networks, offering protection, companionship, and shared resources. They exchanged news, advice, and emotional support, navigating the dangers of their profession as a community rather than in isolation. Conflicts did arise, over customers, space, or personality clashes, but survival depended on cooperation. Interactions with other townspeople were complex and often fraught. While some neighbors tolerated or even supported the women, others viewed them with suspicion or disdain. Local merchants, tavern owners, or clergy might engage with prostitutes out of necessity, charity, or moral concern. The line between exclusion and acceptance was delicate, shifting with economic conditions, social attitudes, and individual relationships. Family ties were often strained or severed. Many women came from poor or broken households, while others were disowned due to their profession. Children born to prostitutes faced particular challenges. Some were cared for by relatives or fostered out, while others grew up within the brothels, inheriting cycles of poverty and marginalization. The emotional weight of these separations was a quiet undercurrent in many lives. Outside the immediate world of their rooms, women negotiated a careful existence in public spaces. Streets were dangerous, especially at night, with threats ranging from harassment to physical assault. Some towns instituted curfews or patrols, ostensibly to protect citizens but sometimes exacerbating vulnerabilities. Women learned to move quickly, to recognize allies and threats, and to avoid places where trouble was likely. Economic transactions extended beyond the act of sex. Prostitution was often entangled with debts to brothel keepers or landlords, payments to local officials, or bribes to avoid punishment. Money management required skill and prudence. Saving was difficult but not impossible. Some women invested in small goods, clothing, or even property, striving for a measure of stability or independence. Education and literacy were rare but not unheard of among prostitutes. A few learned to read and write, especially those connected to religious institutions or urban centers. These skills could enhance communication with clients, enable record keeping, or open doors to alternative livelihoods. In some cases, literacy was a means of self-empowerment amid marginalization. Religious and spiritual practices offered complex sources of hope and conflict. Some women found comfort in faith communities, while others faced condemnation or exclusion. Acts of charity from religious orders sometimes included food, shelter, or medical care, creating fragile alliances. Pilgrimages or participation in festivals provided temporary relief from routine and a chance for reflection or renewal. Daily life was also punctuated by rituals of hygiene and health maintenance. Despite limited resources, women sought baths when possible, applied herbal salves, and relied on midwives or healers for ailments and childbirth. The constant threat of disease and injury made medical knowledge crucial, even if often rudimentary or ineffective. Entertainment and leisure, though limited, provided moments of joy and escape. Dancing, singing, storytelling, and games helped pass time and foster social bonds. Festivals, fairs, and market days brought color and excitement, occasionally allowing women to dress up, perform, or engage with the wider community. In balancing the public and private spheres, medieval prostitutes lived in a continual state of negotiation between survival and dignity, danger and solidarity, stigma and belonging. Their stories, etched into the very walls of their cramped rooms and whispered through shared confidences, offer a poignant glimpse into the resilience and complexity of human life in a bygone era. Under the dim glow of oil lamps and flickering candles, the relationships between medieval prostitutes and their patrons unfolded with a delicate blend of business, power, and, occasionally, unexpected intimacy. These connections were far more intricate than mere transactions. They reflected the social hierarchies, economic dependencies, and personal desires that shaped daily life in medieval towns. Clients came from diverse walks of life, travelers, merchants, soldiers, craftsmen, and sometimes even nobles. For many men, visiting a prostitute was a socially tolerated, if not openly discussed, part of urban life. However, the motivations behind these visits varied greatly. Some sought companionship, others momentary pleasure, and a few pursued genuine affection or escape from loneliness. Negotiation was a crucial skill on both sides. Women assessed clients quickly, gauging wealth, temperament, and intentions. Prices could fluctuate depending on the time of day, the services requested, or the client's status. Experienced prostitutes learned to balance firmness with charm, knowing when to push for better pay or decline dangerous offers. Trust was fragile. Clients who showed kindness or generosity could become regulars, offering a modicum of stability in an unpredictable profession. The dynamics of power in these interactions were complex. While the men held financial control, women wielded agency through their ability to accept or refuse clients, manage boundaries, and cultivate relationships that enhanced their safety and income. In some cases, women acted as gatekeepers to social circles, influencing the movements and reputations of their patrons. Beyond economic exchange, emotional ties sometimes developed. Stories survive of women and clients forming deeper bonds, sharing confidences, and even aspiring to lives together beyond the confines of the trade. Such relationships were fraught with social challenges and personal risks, given the stigma attached to prostitution. Yet, for some, these connections provided comfort, companionship, or a path toward a different future. Interactions with town authorities were often fraught with tension. Local magistrates, constables, and tax collectors played ambiguous roles, sometimes enforcing laws strictly, other times accepting bribes or overlooking infractions. Women had to navigate these shifting power structures carefully, balancing compliance with resistance. Corruption and favoritism could offer protection or exploitation, depending on circumstances. The Church's influence permeated these dynamics deeply. Official doctrine condemned prostitution as sinful, promoting repentance and chastity. Clergy preached moral reform and sometimes organized public acts of penance for fallen women. Despite this, religious institutions often provided charity and sanctuary. Convents occasionally sheltered women seeking to leave the trade, offering education, work, or spiritual guidance. Religious festivals and holy days brought both relief and scrutiny. While such occasions allowed for communal celebration and temporary reprieve, they also intensified moral policing. Processions, sermons, and community rituals reinforced societal expectations and the boundaries imposed on women in prostitution. Prostitutes often engaged in their own forms of spiritual practice, blending official religion with folk beliefs. Prayers, charms, and rituals aimed at protection, healing, or luck were common. Many sought comfort in saints associated with mercy, healing, or protection, carrying tokens or invoking their names in moments of fear or hope. The precarious balance between condemnation and care created a complex social landscape. Women negotiated multiple identities: survivors, workers, sinners, and sometimes saints in their own eyes. Their relationships with patrons, authorities, and the Church formed a web of interaction reflecting the contradictions of medieval society itself. Amid these complexities, stories of resilience and adaptation emerge. Some women managed to leverage their connections to improve their circumstances, gaining clients of higher status or establishing themselves as madams. Others found ways to exit the trade, whether through marriage, religious refuge, or alternative livelihoods. The paths were difficult and uncertain, but not closed. The lives lived in these overlapping spheres reveal the multifaceted humanity of women whose stories have too often been simplified or ignored. Their experiences speak to broader themes of power, survival, and community in an era marked by both hardship and hope. As seasons changed and years passed in the medieval world, health remained a fragile and ever-present concern for prostitutes whose bodies bore the daily toll of their trade. Living without the benefits of modern medicine, these women faced illnesses, injuries, and childbirth with limited resources and often immense courage. Their experiences illuminate not only personal suffering but also the broader challenges of medical care and survival in a harsh time. Sexually transmitted diseases were perhaps the most feared afflictions, though medieval understanding of these illnesses was rudimentary at best. Conditions such as syphilis, which began to spread widely in Europe during the late Middle Ages, brought pain, disfigurement, and social stigma. Treatments were based largely on folklore and herbal remedies, with few effective cures available. Women often relied on poultices made from plants like garlic, sage, or marigold, hoping to alleviate symptoms. However, the lack of scientific knowledge meant that infections frequently went untreated, worsening over time. Beyond disease, injuries sustained during work, whether from violence, accidents, or repetitive strain, were common. Bruises, cuts, and broken bones posed serious threats in a world where healing was slow and infections could be fatal. Midwives and local healers played vital roles, offering care with limited tools and knowledge. They used herbal salves, splints made from wood or cloth, and spiritual rituals intended to aid recovery. Childbirth was among the most dangerous experiences a woman could face. Without modern obstetrics, maternal and infant mortality rates were high. Many prostitutes bore children, sometimes fathered by clients or absent men, and faced the dual burden of pregnancy and their precarious social position. Midwives provided support during labor and delivery, employing techniques passed down through generations. Yet, complications were common and often fatal. Infants born into these circumstances faced uncertain futures. Some were raised by their mothers within brothels or shared lodgings, growing up amid the challenges of poverty and social stigma. Others were entrusted to relatives, foster families, or religious institutions. The emotional strain of motherhood, separation, and loss weighed heavily on many women, though these feelings were often concealed behind pragmatic survival. Hygiene practices, limited as they were, played a crucial role in health maintenance. Bathing was infrequent due to scarcity of water and prevailing beliefs that it could be harmful. However, women used herbal washes, vinegar rinses, and scented oils when possible to cleanse their bodies and mask odors. Washing clothes and linens regularly helped reduce infestations of lice and fleas, common nuisances that added to discomfort and disease risk. Nutrition, too, impacted health significantly. The monotonous diet, root vegetables, stale bread, and occasional meat or fish left many women deficient in essential vitamins and minerals. This weakened immune systems and increased susceptibility to illness. During times of scarcity, malnutrition compounded suffering, while feasts or market days offered rare moments of better nourishment. Mental health challenges were often invisible but no less real. The constant pressures of work, stigma, and uncertainty could lead to despair, anxiety, or withdrawal. Some women turned to religious faith, community bonds, or small pleasures to cope. Others struggled silently, their inner lives rarely recorded in historical accounts, but vital to understanding their experiences. Care networks developed organically. Women relied on each other for assistance, sharing knowledge about remedies, offering comfort during illness, and pooling resources for care. Midwives and wise women held respected, though sometimes precarious, positions as healers and confidants. Their knowledge blended practical medicine with spiritual beliefs, addressing both body and soul. Public health concerns occasionally prompted town authorities to take action, especially during outbreaks of plague or other contagious diseases. Measures included quarantines, restrictions on movement, or the temporary closure of brothels. These interventions, while aimed at protecting the wider community, often disproportionately harmed prostitutes, who lacked alternative means of support. The resilience displayed in facing these health challenges is a testament to human endurance. Despite pain, fear, and loss, many women continued their work, cared for their families, and forged social bonds that sustained them through hardship. Their stories remind us that behind historical statistics and moral judgments were real lives marked by complexity, strength, and humanity. Beyond the struggles of health and survival, the emotional and social landscapes of medieval prostitutes were intricate, layered with moments of vulnerability, camaraderie, and fleeting joy. While the outside world often saw them through the narrow lens of their profession, within their own circles and private moments they built networks, rituals, and relationships that gave shape to their days and hope to their futures. Evenings after work were often the most revealing time. In the cramped rooms of brothels or shared lodgings, women would gather to talk, laugh, and exchange news. These conversations might shift rapidly from light gossip about a wealthy merchant's unusual habits to serious warnings about a dangerous client. Humor was a form of resilience. Jokes and playful teasing could turn a grim day into one worth remembering. Laughter, even at small absurdities, was a necessary rebellion against the weight of their circumstances. Friendships between women in the trade were essential, though they could be complicated. Trust had to be earned, competition for clients was real, but once it was, loyalty ran deep. A friend might loan a dress for an important patron, stand guard during a risky encounter, or share the last crust of bread in lean times. These alliances were often stronger than family ties, especially for women who had been cast out by relatives. Public celebrations offered opportunities for these women to step into different roles. Fairs, religious festivals, and market days brought music, dancing, and colorful stalls into the heart of town. Prostitutes might mingle in the crowds, their clothing more vibrant than usual, enjoying roasted meats, spiced wine, or sweet pastries. Such occasions allowed for playful interactions with townsfolk outside the confines of work, sometimes leading to new patrons, but often simply enjoyed for their own sake. Many women had lovers separate from their paying clients, men they cared for without money changing hands. These relationships could be tender but fraught with instability. A lover might promise marriage or protection but disappear without warning. Conversely, some men genuinely supported and defended the women they cared for, offering a rare form of constancy in a world where stability was scarce. In the quiet hours, dreams emerged, of a small cottage far from the city, of opening a tavern or shop, of joining a convent for peace and security. Some women saved diligently toward such goals, hiding coins in floorboards or sewing them into clothing. Others knew their hopes were fragile but cherished them nonetheless, as they gave meaning to each day's labor. For many, religious faith was not incompatible with their work. They might pray before starting the evening, light candles for protection, or visit shrines dedicated to saints known for mercy and healing. Pilgrimages, when possible, were deeply meaningful. Walking miles to a sacred site could feel like a cleansing of the soul, a chance to leave behind sorrow and begin again. Evenings also brought quieter forms of entertainment. Storytelling was common. Narratives of distant lands, historical legends, or fantastical tales passed from one voice to another. Some women sang softly while mending garments. Others practiced simple games with dice or cards. These small pleasures stitched together the fabric of daily life. The environment outside their doors remained unpredictable. Drunken brawls in taverns could spill into the street, requiring a quick retreat indoors. Town watchmen sometimes demanded fines to overlook curfew violations, taking payment in coin or kind. Yet there were also familiar shopkeepers who slipped an extra loaf of bread into a purchase, or neighbors who turned a blind eye to comings and goings, quietly acknowledging mutual dependency. The balance between harsh reality and human connection defined their existence. Each day might bring a mix of risk, loss, laughter, and rare kindness. In that constant flux, women adapted, learning when to show vulnerability, when to guard themselves, and when to seize moments of joy without hesitation. It was in this intricate weaving of hardship and hope, danger and delight, that their lives unfolded. Though bound by the constraints of their profession and the society that judged them, they created small worlds of meaning where they could belong, if only for a moment, to themselves. Money in the medieval world was a currency not just of commerce but of power, survival, and sometimes transformation, especially for prostitutes whose livelihoods depended on navigating a precarious and often exploitative economy. Understanding how these women managed their finances reveals much about their agency, vulnerabilities, and aspirations amid a society structured to limit their options. Payments from clients varied widely depending on many factors: the town's wealth, the woman's reputation and appearance, the time of day, and the services requested. Some prostitutes charged a modest fee, equivalent to a few pence or pennies, that might barely cover food for a day, while others who had cultivated clientele among wealthier merchants or knights could command much higher sums. Pricing was rarely fixed. Negotiation was a daily ritual requiring savvy and tact. Brothel keepers or madams often claimed a significant portion of earnings, typically demanding room rent, a share of income, or fees for providing clients. This arrangement could trap women in cycles of debt, making true financial independence elusive. Yet, some women managed to work independently, renting rooms on their own terms or even employing other women, thereby stepping into roles of economic control and authority. The physical money was often kept hidden, concealed in clothing hems, sewn into linings, or buried beneath floorboards, to protect it from theft by other residents, corrupt officials, or abusive clients. Savings were precious and carefully guarded, forming the foundation of future hopes, whether for escape, investment in better lodging, or dowries to marry. Debt was a constant threat. Loans from madams, neighbors, or even clients came with high interest or conditions that made repayment difficult. Some women became bound to brothels through indebtedness, unable to leave without settling what they owed. Others faced extortion from local officials or guards, forced to part with a portion of their earnings to avoid punishment or harassment. Money also flowed through the wider economy in unexpected ways. Some prostitutes acted as informal bankers, holding or transferring funds for clients or neighbors. Others invested in small goods, fabric scraps, beads, or herbs to sell on market days, supplementing income and diversifying survival strategies. Religious institutions sometimes played a paradoxical role in economics. Convents or charitable groups might offer loans or gifts to women seeking to leave prostitution, but acceptance often required renouncing former lives and conforming to strict moral codes. These options, while offering a route out, were limited and fraught with conditions. The allure of wealth was a powerful motivator. Tales of women who amassed enough money to open taverns, purchase property, or retire into more respectable roles circulated within communities, inspiring hope and envy alike. Yet, these success stories were exceptions amid widespread hardship. Economic fluctuations affected the trade dramatically. Times of war or plague could reduce clientele, increase competition, and drive down prices. Conversely, festivals, market expansions, or influxes of wealthy travelers could boost earnings and create opportunities for advancement. Exchanging money was not only practical but symbolic. The act of payment carried implicit agreements about safety, respect, and boundaries. Disputes over fees could escalate to violence or legal action, underscoring how money was entwined with power and control. Ultimately, the financial dimension of prostitution in the medieval era was a complex dance of negotiation, risk, and occasional empowerment. Women's ability to manage money impacted their daily survival, their health, their social standing, and their dreams of a different life. Medieval prostitutes lived not in isolation but within vibrant towns and cities constantly shaped by the sweeping tides of social and political change. Major events, whether devastating plagues, brutal wars, or the booming growth of commerce, left indelible marks on their lives, transforming the rhythms of their work, their safety, and their very existence. One of the most catastrophic forces was the outbreak of the Black Death in the mid-14th century, which swept through Europe with terrifying speed, killing an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of the population. The plague reshaped medieval society on a profound level, and for prostitutes, it brought both new dangers and unexpected shifts in opportunity. With so many lives lost, labor shortages affected every sector, including the sex trade. Demand fluctuated wildly. Some women saw a drop in clients as fear and mourning gripped the towns, while others found their services in increased demand as people sought comfort amid chaos. The social fabric itself strained under loss and uncertainty, and traditional authorities struggled to maintain order. Public health measures, though primitive, were enacted with urgency. Quarantines, city gates closed at night, and restrictions on movement made work more difficult. Brothels were sometimes shut down temporarily, and women found themselves caught between fear of disease and the necessity to earn a living. Those infected faced isolation or abandonment, and death rates among prostitutes were devastating. Wars and conflicts further complicated life. The movement of armies through towns could bring violent disruption, economic upheaval, and shifting power dynamics. Soldiers, often far from home and seeking relief from hardship, became clients. But their presence also increased the risk of violence and exploitation. Towns occupied or besieged saw destruction and displacement, pushing vulnerable populations into even more precarious situations. On the flip side, times of peace and prosperity brought growth. Expanding trade routes and flourishing markets drew merchants, travelers, and craftsmen, increasing the flow of money and people. New towns and city quarters were built, sometimes designated as tolerance zones, where prostitution was regulated or taxed. This urban growth created spaces where women could establish more stable lives, form communities, and even gain some degree of legal recognition. Political changes affected laws and enforcement. Monarchs or city councils might alternately clamp down on or tolerate prostitution depending on their priorities, moral outlooks, or economic needs. Some rulers saw taxation of brothels as a lucrative revenue source, while others promoted moral reform, shutting down houses or persecuting women. Religious movements, such as the rise of stricter monastic orders or waves of popular piety, intensified pressure on prostitutes. Campaigns for moral purity sometimes resulted in public punishments or forced conversions, further marginalizing women but also occasionally opening doors to religious refuge. Natural disasters, famine, and economic downturns added layers of hardship. Scarcity of food raised prices, weakened health, and heightened competition. Women often bore the brunt of such crises, needing to find new ways to survive or relocate entirely. Amid these shifting external forces, the resilience of prostitutes shone through. Many adapted by moving to new towns, changing their working patterns, or aligning with protective patrons. Networks of women span cities, sharing information about safe places, upcoming dangers, or profitable markets. The interplay between broader historical events and personal lives illustrates how medieval prostitutes were deeply woven into the fabric of their times. Their stories are not only about individual struggle, but also about navigating the vast, unpredictable currents of history, finding pockets of agency amid forces far larger than themselves. Daily life for a prostitute in the Middle Ages unfolded as a careful balance between routine and unpredictability, where each moment could bring either the comfort of familiar habits or the shock of sudden change. From the first light of dawn to the quiet hours before sleep, their days were filled with tasks, negotiations, preparations, and encounters, each shaped by the rhythms of the town and the seasons. Mornings often began later for women who had worked deep into the night. In shared rooms above taverns or in cramped brothel quarters, the first order of business was often practical. Washing, if water was available and affordable, or at least wiping away the smoke and grime of the previous evening. Bathhouses, where they existed, were both a luxury and a necessity, though they came at a cost. The faint scent of lavender oil or rosewater, when a woman could afford it, was more than perfume. It was part of her professional arsenal, a small act of self-presentation in a world that judged harshly on appearance. Clothing maintenance was another essential morning task. Dresses were mended, hems repaired, and stains scrubbed out with coarse soap. Colorful garments, reds, yellows, and deep blues, were popular among prostitutes not only for their visual appeal, but because they made it easier to stand out in a crowd. Many towns even had laws dictating distinctive clothing for prostitutes, often bright or striped, meant to separate them from respectable women. These garments, though intended as a mark of shame, became part of a visual identity that could be leveraged for recognition and business. Breakfasts were simple: coarse bread, cheese, perhaps some onions or dried fruit if coin allowed. On market days, the morning might involve a trip to buy food or supplies, often doubling as an opportunity to be seen by potential patrons. The marketplace was alive with the sounds of traders shouting prices, livestock bleating, and the rhythmic clatter of carts. Here, a well-placed smile or witty remark could secure an evening's work. Midday hours were less busy for many, allowing time for personal errands or rest. Some women took on side work, sewing for neighbors, brewing small batches of ale, or helping in taverns to supplement income. Others sought out friends for conversation, sharing news of clients, warnings about troublemakers, or even stories from faraway towns brought by traveling companions. The afternoon often brought preparations for the night ahead. Hair was styled, braids, ribbons, or curls if time and tools allowed. Jewelry, whether fine or imitation, was polished. A favorite dress might be set aside for a particular client, or accessories chosen to match the mood of an upcoming festival. Those working in brothels were expected to be ready when the doors opened in the early evening, while independent women might begin visiting taverns, gaming houses, or other gathering spots to find customers. Nightfall transformed the streets. Lanterns flickered to life, music and laughter spilled from tavern doors, and the air grew heavy with the mingled smells of roasting meat, spilled ale, and wood smoke. This was the heart of their working life: approaching clients, negotiating terms, ensuring payment, and managing safety. Experienced women knew the subtle art of reading a man's posture, voice, and mood before deciding whether to accept him as a patron. The night could pass in a blur of encounters, laughter, dancing, and occasional danger. Some clients were generous, offering gifts or tips beyond the agreed price. Others were unpredictable, requiring quick thinking or the intervention of friends or bouncers. In regulated brothels, madams kept close watch over proceedings, recording transactions and making sure rules were followed. On the streets, the risk of arrest, harassment, or assault was higher, demanding constant vigilance. By the time the town began to quiet, long after midnight in busier quarters, women returned to their rooms, counting the night's earnings, tending to bruises or sore muscles, and sometimes simply collapsing into sleep without removing their clothes. Coins were hidden, dresses hung or folded, and the cycle prepared to begin again. This daily rhythm, while often grueling, provided a strange kind of stability. Within it, women carved out moments of beauty, friendship, and self-determination. The repetition of tasks, the familiar sights and sounds, even the predictability of certain clients, all of these gave shape to lives otherwise defined by uncertainty. In the shadowed streets and crowded taverns of medieval towns, prostitutes developed a subtle and sophisticated language of signs, gestures, and whispered codes to navigate the dangers and complexities of their world. This unspoken communication served as both shield and sword, a means to protect themselves, attract clients, and evade the ever-watchful eyes of authorities and rivals alike. One of the most essential tools was the careful use of eye contact. A glance could signal availability without drawing undue attention, especially in crowded or patrolled areas. Women learned to catch the gaze of potential patrons and hold it just long enough to convey interest, but to avoid locking eyes with officials or dangerous individuals. This delicate dance required constant vigilance and practiced skill. Clothing and accessories also played a role in this coded language. Certain colors, patterns, or styles might indicate a woman's specialty, price range, or status within the trade. For example, a bright red scarf tied at the wrist might attract wealthier clients, while a simple ribbon could signal a more modest fee. In some towns, rules mandated that prostitutes wear distinguishing garments, stripes, patches, or badges that inadvertently became part of their secret communication system. Hand gestures were another method of discreet signaling. A slight wave, a finger flick, or the way a hand rested on a nearby post could convey messages understood only by those within the community. These signs might warn of approaching danger, announce the presence of a protector, or indicate a client's suitability. Such gestures were especially important when speech was impossible or risky. Street vendors, tavern owners, and even some craftsmen became unwitting participants in these networks. They might nod knowingly at certain women, adjust the placement of goods to block the view of a particular corner, or pass along warnings about suspicious figures. This informal cooperation created a patchwork of protection and information that extended beyond the prostitutes themselves. Verbal codes, rhythmic phrases, nicknames, or double meanings added layers to this communication. Women often adopted pseudonyms or titles that hinted at their reputation or skills, such as the Rose, the Dove, or Lady Nightingale. Clients familiar with these names could request specific women without revealing intentions to outsiders. In taverns, certain songs or poems carried veiled references that served as invitations or warnings. When authorities conducted raids or patrols, these coded signals became vital. A glance exchanged, a sudden change in posture, or a previously agreed-upon phrase could prompt women to disperse, hide, or present themselves as innocent bystanders. The speed and effectiveness of these responses often determined whether arrests occurred or the night continued uninterrupted. Within brothels, internal codes helped maintain order and safety. Women signaled when a client was troublesome or violent, allowing others to avoid dangerous encounters. They also used these signs to mark favorite clients or indicate the availability of special services. The madams themselves employed discreet signals to manage the flow of business and communicate with staff or guards. This hidden language fostered a sense of community and solidarity. Sharing knowledge of these codes was part of initiation for newcomers, a rite of passage that connected them to the shared experience of the trade. Mastery of these signs offered not only practical advantages but also a sense of belonging and empowerment. The sophistication of this communication reflects the intelligence, adaptability, and resilience of medieval prostitutes. Operating under constant threat, they created systems that allowed them to survive and, in some cases, thrive. These silent languages reveal a hidden world of strategy and cooperation beneath the visible surface of medieval urban life. In the labyrinthine alleys of medieval towns, crises were inevitable. Whether sudden raids by city guards, outbreaks of violence, or the arrival of unfamiliar strangers whose intentions were unknown. It was in these moments that the hidden codes and social strategies of prostitutes revealed their true power, transforming chaos into coordinated action and, sometimes, survival. Consider a typical night when the city watch began an unexpected patrol. As armored footsteps echoed down narrow streets, women at their posts exchanged subtle glances, quick, sharp, and loaded with meaning. A slight shift in stance, a barely perceptible wave of a hand, or a change in the tilt of a head signaled the approach of danger. Within seconds, rooms once open to visitors shuttered their doors, windows were curtained, and bodies melted into shadowed corners. In one well-documented instance from a bustling trade city, a madam named Agnes led her household through such a raid with remarkable calm and precision. Years of experience had honed her ability to read the patterns of authority and anticipate their moves. Using a series of knocks on the door, coded in rhythm and number, she warned her staff to hide valuables and prepare false stories. When guards demanded entry, Agnes presented herself as a simple servant, deflecting suspicion with practiced ease. Elsewhere, when violence erupted, perhaps a drunken brawl spilling into the streets, women alerted each other through quick gestures. A finger drawn across the throat warned of deadly danger. A hand raised and lowered meant to seek help. Neighbors familiar with these signs sometimes intervened quietly, breaking up fights or escorting vulnerable women to safety. This network of mutual aid, born from necessity, blurred the lines between profession and community. The arrival of strangers, travelers, soldiers, or merchants also required caution and communication. Women signaled each other about new faces, whether a client was trustworthy, potentially violent, or wealthy enough to merit attention. Some carried small tokens or notes passed discreetly to trusted companions, summarizing their encounters or issuing warnings. These records, though informal, formed a collective memory that shaped decisions and protected livelihoods. Even in moments of joy or celebration, these codes persisted. Festivals and fairs brought crowds where anonymity was greater, but so was risk. Women used their secret signs to find safe gathering spots, coordinate attendance, or mark off-limits areas. Shared songs and phrases lifted spirits while conveying practical information. A dance, a toast, a whispered line could mean friendship, warning, or invitation all at once. Stories passed down through generations capture episodes where these strategies turned the tide. In one tale, a group of women outwitted corrupt officials by feigning illness, using a prearranged cough as a signal for help. Nearby allies responded swiftly, creating distractions that allowed the women to escape. In another, A madam's sharp observation and coded warning saved her entire house from destruction during a fire, as neighbors rallied to aid once the danger was understood. These moments of coordinated response reveal the hidden strength and intelligence embedded in the community. Far from passive victims, prostitutes were active agents shaping their fates through collaboration, quick thinking, and shared knowledge. Their ability to read and send signals was not merely survival, it was resistance. Beyond the practical, this shared language fostered trust and identity. It reinforced bonds of sisterhood and mutual respect, creating a social fabric that transcended the harsh judgments of outside society. Within this fabric, women could find solidarity, dignity, and even moments of joy. Understanding these hidden codes enriches our view of medieval prostitution, revealing a world where survival depended on subtlety, wit, and unspoken agreements. It challenges stereotypes and honors the complexity of lives lived on the margins yet deeply entwined with the pulse of medieval towns. Among the many women whose lives intersected with medieval prostitution, some stand out not just for their circumstances but for the remarkable ways they navigated, challenged, or transcended the harsh realities of their times. These stories, preserved in chronicles, court records, or folk tales, reveal individuals whose courage, wit, or ambition left echoes that survived beyond their era. Take, for instance, the tale of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Though not a prostitute herself, her court and entourage were known to have included women of varied social standings, some of whom influenced culture and politics in subtle ways. Within the lower strata of society, figures like Alice Pearse, who rose from humble beginnings to become the mistress of King Edward III of England, demonstrate how a woman's position, even if socially precarious, could evolve into influence and power. While Alice's story is complex and debated, it highlights the fluidity and contradictions within medieval attitudes towards women, sexuality, and power. More directly connected to the trade were women like Frances de Foix, rumored to have been a courtesan before becoming the mistress of King Francis I of France. Courtesans often occupied ambiguous spaces, part entertainers, part confidants, their roles blending commerce, companionship, and political intrigue. Their influence extended beyond personal relationships into courts and cultural life, subtly shaping tastes, fashions, and even policy. Local records sometimes reveal the stories of less famous but no less compelling women. In a 15th century French town, a woman named Jean was recorded defending herself vigorously in court against charges of witchcraft and prostitution, asserting her dignity and challenging accusations that threatened her life and livelihood. Her testimony offers rare insight into the agency women exercised in legal settings, using wit and knowledge to protect themselves. In Venice, renowned for its regulated red light district, some prostitutes saved enough to buy freedom from the brothels, eventually marrying merchants or artisans. The story of Tullia di Aragona, a 16th century poet and courtesan, shows how education and patronage could elevate a woman's social standing, allowing her to become a respected figure in literary circles, influencing Renaissance culture. Even in England, the infamous Southwark maids, who operated near London Bridge, crafted reputations that brought them both wealth and notoriety. Their interactions with travelers, merchants, and sailors from across Europe made their district a lively and cosmopolitan hub, where cultural exchanges unfolded alongside commerce. These personal histories complicate simple narratives of victimhood. They reveal women exercising choice, forming alliances, and sometimes achieving remarkable success against overwhelming odds. They negotiated identities not only as workers but as mothers, lovers, entrepreneurs, and community members. Their stories also highlight the contradictions of medieval society, where moral condemnation coexisted with economic dependence, where legal persecution mingled with tolerance, and where women's sexuality was both exploited and, in some cases, celebrated or instrumentalized. By tracing these lives, we glimpse the varied paths women forged, the risks they took, and the legacies they left behind, stories often hidden beneath layers of stigma but vital to a fuller understanding of medieval history. Medieval art, literature, and theater often reflected society's complicated and contradictory attitudes toward prostitutes, weaving them into stories, images, and performances that both condemned and humanized these women. Exploring these cultural depictions reveals how prostitution was viewed, not just as a social problem, but as a symbol charged with moral, religious, and sometimes even comedic meaning. In visual art, prostitutes frequently appeared in moralizing works meant to caution viewers against sin. Illuminated manuscripts, frescoes, and altarpieces depicted them alongside figures representing vice, temptation, or punishment. The image of the whore of Babylon from the Book of Revelation was a potent symbol, embodying evil and corruption. Yet, alongside these stern warnings, more nuanced portrayals existed. Scenes of penitence showing prostitutes seeking forgiveness, suggesting the possibility of redemption. In literature, prostitutes emerged in various guises. Medieval morality plays, popular in town squares and churches, dramatized the battle between virtue and vice, often casting prostitutes as embodiments of temptation, but also as figures capable of repentance. Characters like Mum or Mistress Peace in English plays combined humor with social critique, using satire to comment on the hypocrisy of moral authorities. The burgeoning tradition of vernacular literature included more complex portrayals. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, written in the 14th century, features tales involving courtesans and prostitutes, blending humor, wit, and social observation. These stories presented women as intelligent, resourceful, and sometimes subversive, challenging simple stereotypes. Poetry and songs sung in taverns or marketplaces often told tales of love, loss, and desire from the perspective of women in the trade. Though many have been lost, surviving examples hint at a vibrant oral culture where prostitutes express their own voices, sometimes lamenting, sometimes celebrating their lives. Theater, a communal event, brought these portrayals to life. Actors in traveling troupes or local guild performances depicted prostitutes with a mixture of caricature and empathy. Comedy was a common approach, using exaggerated traits for laughs, yet the underlying narratives often revealed social tensions about class, gender, and morality. Audience reactions varied. Sometimes laughter was tinged with sympathy, other times with scorn. Religious festivals and processions also featured dramatizations involving prostitutes, often as warnings or lessons. Penitents dressed as sinners, including fallen women, participated in ritual reenactments that both shamed and acknowledged their presence within the community. These performances reflected the ambivalence of a society grappling with sin and redemption. Interestingly, some artistic depictions served practical purposes. Signs hanging outside brothels, painted with suggestive images or symbols, attracted clients in an era of widespread illiteracy. These visual cues communicated services offered and the status of the establishment, becoming part of the urban landscape. Overall, the cultural portrayals of prostitutes in the Middle Ages were multifaceted, reflecting fear, fascination, and the enduring human complexities surrounding sexuality and survival. They reveal not only societal judgments but also spaces where women could assert identity, challenge norms, and participate in the vibrant cultural life of their times. Medieval legal frameworks surrounding prostitution were as diverse as the towns and kingdoms in which they operated, shaped by the constant push and pull between moral condemnation, economic necessity, and practical governance. The tension between church law, civic law, and everyday realities meant that prostitutes often lived under contradictory sets of rules, condemned in sermons, tolerated in statutes, and sometimes even protected when the flow of money was too valuable to disrupt. In many cities, prostitution was not only tolerated but regulated. Municipal authorities, recognizing that the trade could not be eradicated, sought instead to control it. This meant creating designated districts, red light areas, where brothels were permitted to operate under strict conditions. In Paris, for example, certain streets were famously reserved for the trade, with regulations dictating where women could solicit clients and what hours they could work. Similar zones existed in London's Southwark, Florence's district of Orto San Michele, and the stews along the banks of the Thames. These districts were often strategically placed, near ports, markets, and pilgrimage routes, where travelers and merchants passed in steady streams. The location was not just about convenience for clients. It also allowed authorities to monitor the trade more easily and collect taxes or fines. Yes, taxation was a frequent part of the legal arrangement. Prostitutes and brothel keepers were sometimes required to pay regular fees, which, though burdensome, provided a degree of official recognition and, in theory, protection. But alongside this regulation came heavy restrictions. Sumptuary laws dictated what prostitutes could wear, often forcing them to dress in distinctive colors, stripes, or head coverings to set them apart from respectable women. In some places, they were forbidden from wearing certain types of fabric or jewelry, a rule that not only marked them socially but also limited their ability to blend into elite society. Church law was far less forgiving. Prostitution was condemned as a mortal sin, with clerics preaching fiery sermons against it and religious courts summoning women to repent. Confessors might assign severe penances, sometimes including public humiliation, such as walking barefoot through the streets in plain clothing while reciting prayers. Yet, paradoxically, some church-run institutions operated Magdalene houses, where repentant prostitutes could live under strict discipline, often working in laundry or needlecraft to support the convent. Enforcement of these laws varied dramatically. A brothel might be tolerated for years, even quietly patronized by the very officials charged with shutting it down, until a scandal forced a temporary crackdown. During times of plague or moral panic, prostitution could be scapegoated as a source of divine punishment, leading to expulsions and bans. In other times, city leaders openly acknowledged that prostitution served a practical purpose, believing, however misguidedly, that it helped curb adultery or the seduction of honest women. Resistance to legal control was just as creative as the laws themselves. Some women operated outside the official districts, setting up as private hostesses in rented rooms or working as servants who quietly sold their company on the side. Others formed partnerships with tavern owners or bathhouse keepers, blurring the line between hospitality and sex work. In places where brothel keepers were fined for certain offenses, it was not uncommon for them to bribe officials, pay protection money to local gangs, or call in favors from influential clients to keep business running smoothly. These legal frameworks, contradictory, uneven, and often hypocritical, created a constant undercurrent of negotiation in the lives of medieval prostitutes. They had to know not only the prices of their services but also the fines for breaking curfew, the limits of tolerated behavior, and the personalities of the local guards who patrolled their streets. The regulated medieval brothel was a world unto itself, a microcosm of the larger town but governed by its own rhythms, rules, and atmosphere. Stepping through its doors meant entering a space where business, survival, and social interaction blended in a complex dance, framed by the walls that contained the hopes, fears, and stories of the women who worked there. Typically located in designated districts, these establishments varied in size from a single room above a tavern to sprawling houses with multiple chambers, common areas, and sometimes even courtyards. The architecture was practical, designed to maximize space while providing some privacy. Thick wooden doors, heavy shutters, and narrow windows were common, offering protection from the outside world but also limiting fresh air and light. Inside, the air was thick with a mixture of scents. The smoky residue of burning candles and torches, the sharp tang of spilled ale and wine, the sweetness of incense or herbs like lavender and rosemary burned to mask less pleasant odors, and the underlying musk of bodies crowded together through long nights. The sounds were equally varied: laughter, hushed conversations, occasional disputes, the creak of floorboards, and the rhythmic tapping of fingers on wooden tables. A typical day began late, as women rested from the previous night's work or prepared for upcoming clients. Morning hours were spent cleaning rooms, mending clothes, and tending to personal care, washing hair, applying scented oils, and carefully choosing garments to present themselves attractively yet within the bounds of local regulations. The madam or brothel keeper oversaw these preparations, managing schedules, finances, and disputes. The layout often included a common room where women gathered to socialize, eat, or rest between clients. Here, they shared news, warned each other about dangerous visitors, and exchanged remedies for ailments. Food was simple: stews of grains and vegetables, dried meats, fresh bread, and occasionally fruit or cheese. Meals were communal, fostering a sense of camaraderie despite the competitiveness of the trade. Bedrooms varied in comfort and privacy. Wealthier clients might be shown to better furnished chambers with clean linens, tapestries, and small furnishings, while cheaper rooms were Spartan, sometimes little more than curtained alcoves. Each space had to be kept clean and inviting, as appearance influenced client satisfaction and repeat business. The work itself demanded constant adaptability. Women negotiated with clients, balancing firmness and tact to ensure fair payment and personal safety. They learned to read subtle cues, changes in tone, body language, or hesitation, to gauge a client's intentions. When difficulties arose, such as drunkenness or aggression, experienced women called on madams or guards to intervene. Entertainment within the brothel was both a business strategy and a relief from hardship. Singing, dancing, storytelling, and games like dice or cards helped pass time and attract patrons. Some women played musical instruments, adding to the festive atmosphere. These moments of joy were vital, creating bonds and lifting spirits. At night, the brothel came alive. Lanterns cast flickering shadows, and the pace quickened as clients arrived. Transactions unfolded with practiced efficiency, but beneath the surface, personal dramas, friendships, rivalries, romances, and betrayals played out in quiet corners. The tension between work and personal life was a constant challenge. Security was a critical concern. Doors were often locked after hours, and trusted men, bouncers or guards, patrolled to deter troublemakers. Women learned to protect each other, sharing knowledge of dangerous clients and signaling warnings through the hidden codes developed over time. Despite the hardships, many women found in the brothel a form of community and relative stability unavailable elsewhere. The shared space offered protection from the harsher dangers of street work and an environment where knowledge and experience could be pooled. This glimpse inside a regulated medieval brothel reveals a complex social environment where commerce, survival, and human connection intertwined. It was a place of contrasts, of exploitation and empowerment, vulnerability and strength, despair and fleeting happiness. Motherhood in the medieval world was a profound and often complicated experience for prostitutes, intertwining with their work, social standing, and survival in ways both tender and harsh. Despite the stigma attached to their profession, many women became mothers, navigating the challenges of pregnancy, childbirth, and child-rearing while maintaining their livelihoods amid a society that offered limited support and numerous judgments. Pregnancy was fraught with risks. Medieval medical knowledge was limited, and women faced dangers from complications during birth, infections, or poor nutrition. For prostitutes, these risks were compounded by the physical demands of their work and often precarious living conditions. Many sought the help of midwives, women skilled in delivering babies and offering advice on health. Midwives were essential figures in their communities, providing care, comfort, and sometimes discreet assistance to women shunned by formal medical practitioners. The decision to continue working during pregnancy varied. Some women reduced their workload, relying on savings or help from fellow workers, while others continued as long as physically possible. Financial necessity often dictated these choices, with motherhood rarely offering the safety net it might in other social classes. Raising children presented another set of challenges. Many prostitutes struggled to provide stable homes, especially when brothels or rented rooms were crowded and unsafe for children. Some entrusted their offspring to relatives, friends, or religious institutions, hoping to secure better futures for them. Others raised their children within the trade's confines, juggling the demands of work and motherhood daily. Social relationships, both familial and communal, played vital roles. Family ties could be sources of support or rejection. Some women were abandoned by their kin due to their profession, while others maintained close bonds, receiving assistance or shelter when needed. Friendships within brothels or neighborhoods formed informal support networks, sharing childcare responsibilities, resources, and emotional solidarity. Romantic relationships complicated matters further. Some women had partners who accepted or even supported their work, offering protection or sharing earnings. Others faced betrayal or abandonment, adding to the burdens of survival. Marriage, when it occurred, was often a fraught negotiation between social expectations and personal realities. Festivals and religious observances offered rare moments of respite and community involvement. Celebrations such as Christmas, Easter, or local saints' days brought townspeople together in dances, feasts, and rituals. Prostitutes sometimes participated, finding acceptance in shared traditions despite their marginal status. These events punctuated the year's rhythms, offering opportunities for renewal, hope, and connection. Seasonal changes affected both work and daily life. Winters could be harsh and slow, with fewer clients and more illnesses, while summers brought increased traffic, fairs, and opportunities for business. The natural cycles of planting and harvest influenced food availability and prices, impacting nutrition and health. Children's roles within these contexts varied. Some worked alongside their mothers, learning trades or assisting in small tasks. Others attended rudimentary schools or religious instruction if circumstances allowed. Education was generally limited but valued as a path to a different life. The intertwining of motherhood, family, and social ties in the lives of medieval prostitutes paints a picture of resilience and complexity. Far from one-dimensional figures, these women navigated a web of relationships that sustained them amid adversity, shaping identities that balanced care, survival, and community. Medieval festivals, religious holidays, and town events shaped the rhythms of daily life for everyone, including prostitutes, offering a mix of opportunity, risk, celebration, and reflection. These occasions punctuated the calendar, creating cycles of heightened activity, social interaction, and shifting attitudes that influenced the trade and the women's experiences profoundly. One of the most significant festivals was the Feast of Carnival, celebrated in many European towns in the days leading up to Lent. Carnival was marked by indulgence, masquerades, music, and public revelry, a temporary lifting of social restrictions and a license for excess before the austerity of Lent. For prostitutes, Carnival often meant an increase in clients, as townsfolk sought pleasure before the season of fasting and penitence. The festive masks and costumes also allowed women and patrons a degree of anonymity, facilitating encounters that might be otherwise impossible or risky. Easter and Christmas, central to medieval religious life, were times of both solemnity and communal celebration. During these holidays, many prostitutes attended church services, either out of genuine faith, social obligation, or as part of public penance rituals. Some were invited to participate in special prayers or processions aimed at repentance and forgiveness, reflecting the complex relationship between sin and redemption that characterized medieval Christianity. Local saints' days and fairs were other crucial markers on the calendar. These events drew large crowds, including merchants, pilgrims, and entertainers, creating bustling marketplaces where commerce thrived. For prostitutes, fairs were both a boon and a challenge, opportunities to attract new clients but also increased scrutiny from authorities and rival factions. Many women traveled with the fairs or maintained contacts in different towns, forming networks that allowed them to adapt to the shifting tides of demand. The season of Lent imposed restrictions not only on food and drink but also on behavior. Prostitution was officially condemned, and in some places, brothels closed temporarily or reduced their activities. Women sometimes engaged in acts of public penance, wearing sackcloth, attending mass, or performing charity to show contrition. However, the effectiveness of these measures varied, and demand often remained, hidden beneath the surface of official morality. Harvest festivals and midsummer celebrations offered another rhythm, celebrating fertility, abundance, and community. These times were often filled with dancing, singing, and feasting, blurring the lines between sacred and secular life. For prostitutes, the heightened social activity brought both increased income and the dangers of disorder or violence. Weather and seasons played practical roles as well. Winter months were harsh, with cold, damp conditions making street work perilous. Fires and candles provided warmth and light in brothels, but illness was more common. Spring and summer brought renewal, warmer weather, fresher food, and more foot traffic, generally boosting business. Throughout the year, the constant interplay of celebration, work, and survival defined the lives of medieval prostitutes. Festivals and holidays offered moments of joy and connection amid hardship, but also underscored the fragile balance they maintained between societal acceptance and exclusion. Medieval prostitutes faced a daunting array of health challenges that shaped every aspect of their lives, from daily routines to long-term survival. The combination of physically demanding work, poor living conditions, and limited medical knowledge made illness and injury common, while access to care was often precarious and fraught with stigma. Sexually transmitted infections, though not understood in modern medical terms, were widespread and devastating. Symptoms such as sores, discharge, and pain were frequent, yet treatments were rudimentary. Remedies ranged from herbal concoctions, infusions of willow bark, sage, or yarrow, to poultices made from plant extracts, sometimes applied by midwives or healers. Unfortunately, many supposed cures were ineffective or harmful, and chronic infections could lead to infertility, debilitating pain, or death. Beyond sexual health, everyday ailments like respiratory infections, gastrointestinal problems, and skin diseases took a heavy toll. Poor nutrition, exposure to cold and damp, and the exhaustion of long hours weakened immune systems, making recovery difficult. Tuberculosis, often called consumption, was a feared disease that spread easily in crowded quarters. Injuries from violent encounters, bruises, cuts, broken bones, were common occupational hazards. Women learned basic first aid techniques, using herbs like comfrey for wounds and salves to soothe pain. However, serious injuries might be left untreated due to lack of funds or fear of exposure. Mental health struggles, while not formally recognized, were an undeniable reality. The constant threats of violence, social rejection, and economic uncertainty caused anxiety, depression, and trauma. Some women found solace in religious faith, communal bonds, or occasional moments of leisure, but many endured profound isolation. Access to medical care was limited and complicated by social stigma. Licensed physicians rarely treated prostitutes, and hospitals often refused them admission. Instead, women relied on midwives, herbalists, or folk healers, figures who combined practical knowledge with traditional beliefs. These practitioners provided care in homes or communal spaces, sometimes charging fees that were a fraction of formal medical services. Religious institutions offered some support, particularly through orders dedicated to caring for the sick and poor. Magdalene asylums and similar establishments aimed to help repentant women, providing food, shelter, and basic care. However, entry into such institutions required renouncing the profession and accepting strict discipline. Preventive measures included the use of protective amulets, charms, or prayers believed to ward off illness and evil. Women carried small tokens or recited incantations before and after work, blending superstition with hope. Despite the challenges, many medieval prostitutes displayed remarkable resilience. They developed personal health routines, shared remedies among peers, and adapted to the harsh realities of their environment. Their survival was a testament to endurance in the face of systemic neglect. Medieval prostitutes lived under a heavy cloud of social stigma and daily discrimination that affected nearly every aspect of their existence. Despite their crucial role in the urban economy and society, these women were often marginalized, shunned, and subjected to harsh judgments that shaped their interactions with families, neighbors, authorities, and even clients. Within the community, prostitutes were frequently viewed with suspicion and disdain. Neighbors might whisper rumors, avoid contact, or openly mock them in public spaces. This social ostracism reinforced their marginal status, making it difficult to form lasting friendships or receive support outside their immediate circles. Even children of prostitutes often bore the burden of stigma, facing prejudice and limited opportunities. Religious teachings intensified these attitudes, branding prostitution as a sin and moral failing. Sermons, confessions, and public penance underscored the condemnation, framing prostitutes as corrupting influences and enemies of virtue. This moral judgment justified legal penalties, social exclusion, and sometimes violent punishment. Authorities used this stigma to enforce control. Women could be fined, publicly humiliated, or imprisoned simply for being known or suspected prostitutes. In some towns, they were required to wear distinctive clothing, marking them as outcasts in everyday life. Such measures increased vulnerability to exploitation and abuse by officials and others in power. Even clients could perpetuate discrimination, viewing prostitutes as disposable or dishonorable. While some clients formed bonds or offered protection, many treated women as mere commodities, leading to cycles of mistreatment and violence. Street harassment and assault were constant dangers. Employment opportunities outside sex work were scarce due to prejudice. Women often found themselves trapped in a profession they might wish to leave, with few alternatives for income or housing. Attempts to exit the trade were complicated by social barriers and economic dependency. Yet, within this harsh environment, women developed resilience and strategies to navigate discrimination. Communities of prostitutes provided mutual support, sharing resources, information, and emotional solidarity. Some formed alliances with sympathetic patrons or protectors who offered security. Stories of redemption and escape, while less common, highlight the potential for transformation. Some women married, gained education or vocational skills, or entered religious life. Magdalene houses and charitable institutions offered paths out of the trade, though often accompanied by strict discipline and renunciation. The tension between condemnation and survival shaped the complex identities of medieval prostitutes. They lived in a world where social rejection was balanced by personal agency, community bonds, and moments of dignity. Understanding these dynamics deepens our appreciation of their lived experiences beyond stereotypes and moral judgment. Prostitutes occupied a significant and often overlooked role within the medieval urban economy, functioning as vital participants in the commerce and social life of towns and cities. Far from being mere marginal figures, their labor intertwined with various sectors, hospitality, entertainment, trade, contributing to economic circulation and the vibrancy of urban culture. Brothels and individual sex workers generated steady income streams, attracting clientele ranging from local artisans and merchants to traveling nobles and pilgrims. The fees paid for services fueled not only the women's livelihoods but also supported madams, landlords, tavern owners, and suppliers. Inns and taverns hosting or adjacent to brothels benefited from increased patronage, as clients spent on food, drink, and lodging. Taxation of prostitution, though variable by region, provided municipal coffers with much-needed revenue. In some cities, official licenses were sold to brothel keepers, and fines or fees collected from workers contributed to public funds. This system, while exploitative, also reflected a pragmatic recognition by authorities of the trade's economic importance. The trade stimulated associated industries. Tailors and seamstresses crafted distinctive garments and accessories, while perfumers and apothecaries supplied perfumes, salves, and remedies. Craftsmen produced furniture, candles, and utensils used within brothels. Even entertainers such as musicians and dancers found work in these social spaces, creating a microeconomy centered around pleasure and companionship. Moreover, prostitutes played roles in informal financial networks. Some acted as informal lenders or intermediaries, using savings to extend credit or invest in small businesses. This financial agency, though rarely documented, hints at economic strategies beyond mere survival. Their presence also influenced urban planning and social policies. The creation of regulated districts affected property values, business locations, and policing priorities. These zones often became lively, diverse neighborhoods with a mix of commerce, entertainment, and residence, contributing to the urban fabric's complexity. However, this economic role existed alongside social tensions. While authorities taxed and regulated the trade, they also imposed restrictions and penalties aimed at controlling behavior and limiting visibility. This contradictory stance reflected broader societal ambivalence toward prostitution: necessary but shameful, profitable but polluting. Understanding the economic functions of prostitutes in medieval towns provides a richer picture of urban life, revealing how their labor connected with broader patterns of trade, social interaction, and governance. It challenges simplistic views and highlights the intertwined nature of economy, culture, and morality. The lives of medieval prostitutes were shaped by a complex web of challenges, resilience, and contradictions, where survival required constant negotiation between societal condemnation and practical necessity. Throughout this long journey, these women faced not only the hardships of their work, violence, disease, poverty, but also the weight of stigma that sought to define and limit them. Yet, within the shadows of medieval towns and cities, they forged communities, developed intricate systems of communication and protection, and claimed moments of agency and dignity. Their presence influenced the social, economic, and cultural fabric of their time, reminding us that history is never one-dimensional. Through stories of hardship and hope, exclusion and belonging, exploitation and empowerment, we glimpse the richness of lives often erased from the official record. Though the world around them was harsh and unyielding, many found ways to endure, adapt, and sometimes transform their circumstances, leaving legacies of courage and complexity. Their stories challenge us to look beyond judgment and to understand the human realities that have persisted across centuries. Thank you for listening to this exploration of medieval prostitution and the many facets of these women's lives. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I hope this story brought you insight and reflection as you drift toward rest.